The night was heavy with mist, the kind that clung to the trees like whispered secrets. Lyra sat by the narrow window of her small tower room, the candlelight flickering against her pale face. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the parchment. She had written it with careful thought, yet her heart raced with a mix of fear and excitement. She had wanted to express herself, her loneliness, her longing, her secret dreams that had no audience in the quiet, cold halls of the kingdom. The words were hers alone, private and fragile, yet she had dared to send them out. The problem was, she had sent them to the wrong person. Lyra thought she had been sending it to her friend, a court scholar who loved letters and stories. Instead, her words of longing, her musings about freedom and the loneliness of the heart, had traveled all the way to the Alpha King himself, the man the kingdom both feared and adored. The Alpha King was a figure wrapped in legend. People said he had the strength of 10 men, that his eyes could pierce through walls, and that his presence alone could silence an entire hall. He was known to be untouchable, unapproachable, a man shaped by power and the weight of a crown that never slept. And now, because of her careless hand, he knew her thoughts. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. He won't come. He can't. Surely, he has more important matters than a foolish letter. Yet, deep in her bones, a shiver told her that the kingdom's shadows carried more than rumors tonight. The clock struck 3. A sudden, echoing knock at her door froze her blood. Her heart leapt violently, almost as if it wanted to escape her chest. She held her breath, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The knock came again, more insistent. It was deliberate, controlled, and unmistakable. Lyra knew before even turning the handle that it could be no one else. Her mind raced. It can't be. It's impossible. Yet, when she opened the door, there he stood, the Alpha King, taller than she had imagined, his cloak dark as midnight and damp with the mist outside. His eyes were like storm clouds, brooding, immense, and impossible to look away from. His expression held amusement, but beneath it, there was a sharp intelligence, a curiosity that unsettled her. "So, this is the voice that dared to speak to me alone," he said, his voice low, smooth, and resonant. It carried weight, authority, and something else, something that made her heart ache in a way she could not name. Lyra stumbled back, her hand brushing against the doorframe. Words failed her. Fear and awe tangled into a tight knot in her throat. I didn't mean to." The king's lips curved into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "Of course you didn't. But intention is rarely the measure of consequence." She noticed the way he studied her, as if weighing her thoughts, her courage, and her very essence. A strange heat ran through her, a mixture of dread and fascination. He was dangerous, and yet, in a way, magnetic. "Why? Are you here?" she finally whispered. He stepped closer, and the shadows of the room seemed to deepen, hugging the corners as though the night itself was holding its breath. "Because, Lyra, someone has dared to speak truths meant only for the dark, and I am very curious about who dares to do so." Lyra froze at the sound of her name on his lips. She had not signed the letter. How did he know? Panic fluttered in her chest. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling, but there was a strange strength in her tone, the tiniest spark of defiance. "Ah," he said softly, his eyes glinting with something unreadable. "But I am. And now, you must answer me." Lyra wanted to retreat, to hide, to disappear into the shadows of her tower. But something about the Alpha King held her in place, as if the very air around him was charged, pulling her forward. She realized, with a mixture of fear and thrill, that she could not look away. He stepped into the room, the faint scent of the forest and the cold night following him. Every movement was deliberate, every glance calculated. He was not a man used to being challenged, yet there was a quiet patience in the way he watched her, as if testing not just her courage, but her spirit. Lyra's mind raced. Why me? Why would he come? Her thoughts tumbled into confusion. Yet a strange feeling rose within her, a dangerous, delicate flutter of excitement. "Sit," he commanded softly, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. She obeyed, trembling, but also compelled by the strange intimacy of the moment. He remained standing, a shadowed figure against the candlelight, his presence filling the room with quiet dominance. "I received a letter," he said, almost casually, though his voice carried an edge that made her stomach tighten. A letter that spoke of longing, of fear, of a heart trapped by loneliness. I could not ignore it. And now, he paused, letting the words hang in the cold, silent air. "I am here." Lyra swallowed hard, feeling exposed, as if the very walls of her tower could see her secret heart. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to vanish entirely. But the king's eyes, sharp and piercing, held her in a way that made any attempt at escape impossible. "You have a voice few dare to use," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "And words are dangerous. They can summon storms, awaken the dead, or unravel kingdoms." His tone softened, almost imperceptibly, and she thought she saw a shadow of loneliness behind the storm of power in his eyes. Lyra found herself speaking, almost against her will. I only wanted someone to hear me. I didn't think it would reach you." He studied her, and for the first time, the intensity in his eyes wavered slightly, revealing a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even admiration. "And yet it did. You spoke truth, even without knowing the risk." The air between them thickened, heavy with unsaid words and unspoken tension. Lyra realized that her life, once quiet and lonely, had shifted in an instant. The Alpha King, the man whose name was spoken with reverence and fear across the kingdom, was here, in her room, staring at her with a strange mix of authority and something softer, something dangerous in its intensity. Minutes passed in silence, filled only by the flicker of candlelight and the soft whistle of the wind outside. Every moment stretched, taut with expectation. Lyra felt as if she were balancing on the edge of a precipice, aware that a single misstep could send her tumbling into unknown darkness. Finally, the king spoke again, his voice low and resonant. "You cannot hide behind shadows forever, Lyra. And neither can I. There are truths here between us that demand attention. Whether you are ready or not." Lyra's heart raced. She wanted to flee, but her body refused. There was a pull she could not explain, a strange fascination that made fear and desire twist together. She realized that her accidental letter had not just reached the king, it had awakened something in him, something that now reached for her in the quiet, misted night. And then, with a quiet finality, he leaned just slightly forward, his presence overwhelming, commanding, impossible to ignore. His stormy eyes held her in place, and he said, almost in a whisper, but with certainty that left no room for denial, "So, tell me, Lyra, who are you when no one is looking? Who dares to speak to me in the dark?" Lyra's voice caught in her throat. She could not speak, she could not hide, and she knew, in the marrow of her bones, that her life had changed forever. Outside, the wind howled through the misty forest, wrapping the tower in shadows. Inside, the night held its breath, and somewhere, between fear and fascination, curiosity and desire, a bond had begun. A bond that neither of them could yet name, but one that would shape the course of both their lives. The Alpha King, who had never known a voice so fearless, so honest, now stood in the doorway to her life, and the quiet night trembled with possibility. The storm had arrived, and it carried her name. The dawn did not arrive in its usual gentle way. Mist lingered like a soft veil over the forest, and the quiet of Lyra's tower seemed heavier than before. She had barely slept. The memory of the Alpha King's presence haunted her the way his eyes had held hers, the weight of his words pressing on her chest like a storm yet to come. She moved cautiously through the room, her thoughts tangled. Her tower had always been her sanctuary, a place of quiet solitude, but now it felt exposed, fragile. Every shadow seemed to hide unseen eyes. Every whisper of wind felt like a messenger carrying his voice. Lyra had hoped the king would leave, that the encounter had been a fleeting curiosity, a visit born of intrigue that would not last. But as the morning sun tried to pierce the mist outside, a soft knock came again at her door. Her heart leapt, and she froze. Not surprised she had expected this, but a strange mix of dread and anticipation. When she opened the door, he was there again. Clad in dark fabrics that seemed to swallow the light, he stood in silence. His presence was less commanding this time, more measured, as though he were testing the space, testing her. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying the faintest edge of amusement. "I trust the night treated you well?" "One." Lyra tried to smile, but it faltered. I did not sleep much," she admitted. "And you? Are you always awake so early?" His gaze softened for the briefest moment, and she caught the shadow of weariness in his eyes. "Duty does not wait for sleep," he replied, "and curiosity does not wait for caution." Lyra stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The tower felt smaller, the air charged with tension. She noticed, as she always did now, the way the king carried himself. Every movement, precise, deliberate. A man shaped by power, yet somehow burdened by it. "I suppose you will ask me about the letter," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. He inclined his head slightly. "I am not interested in words alone. I want to know the heart behind them. And the heart behind your words is unusual." His gaze pierced hers. Searching. Calculating. "Most dare not reveal such truths to me. Most fear my eyes. But you have none of that fear, though I suspect it is not bravery that moves you." Lyra felt a tremor run through her. How could he see so much, so clearly, through her careful walls? She had always been cautious, careful, quiet, and yet, here he stood, reading her like a book she had not wanted anyone to see. I do not know why I wrote it," she admitted, her hands tightening around the edges of her cloak. "Perhaps because I felt no one would ever hear me. I thought maybe someone in the court would understand." The king moved closer, stopping just beyond the candlelight. Shadows clung to him like a cloak, and his eyes shone with a strange intensity. "Understanding is rare," he said, "even rarer when words are hidden behind fear. You have shown me what few have dared." Lyra's breath caught. The tension between them was almost tangible, pulling at her in ways she could not name. She wanted to retreat, but curiosity and some unspoken connection rooted her in place. "You are not like the others," he said softly, almost to himself. Then, turning fully toward her, he added, "And I am not like the others either. That is why your letter matters." A shiver ran through her. The air between them was charged, filled with unsaid words and unspoken desires. She realized that, despite the fear that gnawed at her, she wanted to stay in this storm of presence. "I do not understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "Why me? Why this? Why now?" He regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke. "Because the night hides more than shadows. It hides truths. And truths, once revealed, cannot be ignored." Lyra's mind raced. His words were heavy, layered. Was he speaking of the letter, or of something deeper? Something that stretched beyond words into the dangerous corners of the kingdom and the heart. The king moved again, pacing slowly. Each step was deliberate, measured. Yet there was a rhythm to it that seemed almost hypnotic. "You must understand, Lyra, that my life is not my own. Every choice is bound by the crown. Every action observed. Trust is rare. And yet, I find myself drawn to you, not just to your words, but to the courage behind them." Lyra's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to deny, to retreat, but the words died on her lips. There was something magnetic in the way he looked at her, a pull she could not resist. And yet, he continued, his voice low and deliberate, I do not fully trust. That would be foolish. And I will test you, not because I doubt your words, but because I must know what lies beneath them. A cold thrill ran through her. A test? With the Alpha King? Fear clawed at her chest. But so did something else, a dangerous, quiet excitement. She realized that in his eyes, there was not just authority, but also a spark of challenge, of play, of something she could not name. He stepped closer again, close enough that she could see the faint lines of weariness around his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. Tonight, he said, his tone softening slightly, we will speak again. But not as king and subject. Not as stranger and messenger. We will speak as equals, or as close to equals as the world allows. Lyra's fingers tightened on her cloak. And if I fail? Then, he said, and a shadow of a smile touched his lips, you will have taught me something I did not know. And I will decide what that lesson costs. For the rest of the day, Lyra moved through her tasks as if in a fog. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper of wind felt like it carried the king's presence. She wondered if he had truly left, or if his shadow lingered in every corner of her tower. Night came, as it always did, but now it felt heavier, alive. When she returned to her small room, she found him waiting, as if he had always been there. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows that danced like spirits on the walls. He gestured to the small chair in the corner. Sit, he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle, yet still commanding. Tonight, we speak. Lyra obeyed, her hands trembling slightly. The space between them was filled with quiet tension, a silence so profound that it seemed to pulse with the beat of her own heart. You must tell me, he began. What lies behind your words? What do you seek? What do you fear? And what do you desire? Lyra hesitated, her mind racing. Desire. The word was heavy, dangerous, and frightening. And yet, she could not lie. Not to him. Somehow, she felt that the Alpha King could see through deception as easily as he had seen through her letter. I desire freedom, she whispered. Not just from the tower, or from loneliness, but freedom to speak, to feel, to live without fear. He studied her, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a force pressing against her chest. And yet, you remain here, he said softly, almost a statement rather than a question. Why? Because, her voice faltered, because I do not know if I am brave enough to face the world alone, and because I did not think anyone would ever hear me. The king stepped closer, and for a brief moment, the shadows softened. You are braver than you know, he said quietly. And someone has heard you. Not just me, but perhaps the world you fear. Lyra's throat tightened. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. A mixture of fear, longing, and something she could not name. The Alpha King, the man she had feared and admired, was here listening, understanding, challenging, and yet, somehow drawn to her courage. And then, with sudden decisiveness, he stepped back, breaking the invisible spell. Rest now, he commanded softly. The night is not yet over, and tomorrow, we continue. But remember this, Lyra, truth, once spoken, cannot be taken back. And you have spoken it. She watched him leave, the candlelight flickering against the empty room. Her heart pounded. Her mind was a storm of fear, curiosity, and an unnameable longing. The king's presence lingered, not just in the room, but in the corners of her mind, in the pulse of her own heartbeat. She realized then that nothing would ever be the same. The quiet tower, the lonely nights, the careful solitude, all of it had shifted. And she knew, deep down, that the Alpha King would return, bringing with him challenges, questions, and perhaps revelations she was not yet ready to face. But even in her fear, a small spark of something dangerous and thrilling glowed in her chest. She had spoken. And now, the game of shadows had begun. The mist outside swirled, wrapping the tower in silent secrecy. Inside, Lyra sat alone, trembling, yet unwilling to hide from the storm that had arrived at her door. The Alpha King had returned, and the night was far from over. The mist clung to the forest like a living veil, soft and silent. But inside Lyra's tower, the air was far from still. Since the Alpha King's first visit, each day had been a careful dance of uncertainty and fascination. She found herself thinking of him more than she wished, his stormy eyes and commanding presence lingering in her mind, even when he was not near. He had returned every night since that first visit, speaking to her in ways that unsettled her and yet drew her closer. Sometimes he tested her, challenging her thoughts, her courage, even her honesty. Other times, he simply listened, and in those rare moments of quiet, she glimpsed a man burdened by the weight of his crown and the loneliness it brought. Tonight, the tower felt different. Shadows stretched longer, heavier, and the air seemed thick with anticipation. Lyra paced the small room, her hands wringing together. She was waiting, knowing without doubt that he would appear, and that the night would demand something from both of them she was not yet ready to name. The knock came soft, deliberate, almost a whisper. Her heart leapt, and she opened the door to find him standing there, eyes shadowed but intent, cloak damp with mist. He did not smile this time. His presence alone carried the weight of authority and danger. And yet there was something more, a vulnerability, subtle and unspoken, that made her chest tighten. "You are here," she said, trying to steady her voice. "And yet, I do not know why." He stepped inside, pacing slowly, each movement deliberate, like a predator circling a point of curiosity. "Because we are far from finished," he said quietly. "You have spoken truths, Lyra, but truths can be dangerous. They demand confrontation, understanding, and sometimes sacrifice." Lyra's stomach twisted. "Sacrifice?" He stopped and turned toward her, the candlelight catching the edges of his stormy eyes. "Yes. You have dared to speak your heart. And now, the world may ask for more than words. It may ask for action." Quote, she felt a tremor in her chest. Not just fear, but a strange excitement. A dangerous thrill that tangled with her nerves. "And what if I fail?" He studied her silently, as if weighing her very soul. "Then I will learn something about courage I have never known. And perhaps you will learn something about yourself as well." The tension between them was like a living thing, curling in the air, pressing against her skin. Lyra realized that she no longer wanted to retreat. She wanted to face him, face this storm, even if it frightened her. I do not know if I can be brave," she admitted softly. "I am alone. I have never faced anyone like you." "No." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, yet he did not touch her. "Bravery is not the absence of fear," he said quietly, "but the choice to act despite it. You have acted already, simply by speaking. And now, you must act again." Lyra felt the weight of his words settle over her, heavy and unavoidable. She realized, with a mixture of fear and determination, that this was no longer just about a letter or a visit in the night. This was about trust, about courage, about stepping into a storm she had never imagined. The Alpha King moved toward the window, looking out at the misted forest. "The court is not what it seems," he said, almost to himself. "There are those who would see me weakened, undone by fear and manipulation, and perhaps by loneliness. They do not understand the cost of the crown or the price of power." Lyra approached cautiously, curiosity overtaking her fear. "And you?" Do you wish for freedom as I do? Or is your life bound entirely by duty? Freedom? And Iman. To the fro. He looked at her then. Truly looked at her. And for the first time, Lyra saw the storm behind his eyes, not just power and authority, but isolation, sorrow, and a longing he had buried beneath duty. I have long since learned that freedom is a dangerous thing, he admitted softly. But perhaps courage, even small and fragile courage, can change the course of what is expected. Her chest tightened at his words. He was no longer just the Alpha King of legend, the untouchable ruler. He was a man who bore burdens she could barely imagine. And yet, in some strange way, sought a connection he had not known he needed. You speak of courage, she said, her voice gaining strength, but I do not know if I have enough. I am afraid of the world, of failure, of what may come. And yet, she hesitated, searching his eyes. I feel that I must try. For you, for me, for something I do not yet understand. The king's gaze softened, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his stormy eyes. Then you are braver than you know, he said quietly, and that bravery may be the key to more than survival. It may be the key to change. They moved together in the quiet of the tower, a delicate dance of words and glances. Every pause, every subtle movement, carried weight. Lyra realized that she no longer feared him entirely. She feared the power of their connection, the pull between them that neither could name. Yet both felt in every glance, every breath, and then the sound came. A soft, deliberate noise from below, the faintest hint of movement in the tower. Lyra stiffened, and the king's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward the hilt of a dagger hidden beneath his cloak. Someone is here, he said softly. Her heart pounded. What do we do? He turned toward her, his stormy gaze intense. We act. Together, the moment stretched, taut with tension, as the footsteps grew nearer. Shadows shifted in the corners of the room, and the candlelight flickered as if it feared the coming danger. Lyra felt a rush of fear, yes, but also a strange clarity. She was not alone. And for the first time, she realized that trust, true trust, was more powerful than fear. They moved as one, silent and precise, toward the source of the noise. Lyra's heart raced, but she kept her focus, guided by the king's presence and the rhythm of his movements. The forest beyond the tower seemed to hold its breath, and the night itself felt alive, watching, waiting. A figure emerged from the shadows below, a court servant, trembling and pale, carrying news that would shake the foundations of the king's rule. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger, yet there was a calm precision in his stance. Speak, he commanded softly, yet firmly. The servant's voice trembled. My king, there are those in the court plotting against you. They know of your weakness, and they plan to strike before the dawn. Lyra's breath caught. The danger was real, more immediate than any fear she had felt before. Yet, as she looked at the king, she realized that he did not flinch, did not falter. There was a strength in him, a calm authority that radiated power and focus. And for the first time, she felt that she could stand with him, not behind him, but beside him. The king turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers with intensity. Do you understand now? He asked. Courage is not a choice made in comfort. It is made in the face of shadows, in the presence of danger, when every instinct cries to flee. Lyra nodded, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. I understand, she said softly, yet with determination. And I will not flee. A faint smile touched his lips, a rare, fleeting thing that seemed almost unreal. Good, he said. Then the night belongs to us, and together we will face what comes. The tension between them eased slightly, replaced by a quiet understanding, a bond forged not in ease, but in the recognition of strength and vulnerability, of trust and fear. Lyra realized that her connection with the king had deepened, and with it, the stakes. Their fates were now entwined, and the dangers ahead would demand not just courage, but a willingness to confront the deepest truths of their hearts. As the candlelight flickered, casting shadows that danced like spirits on the walls, Lyra understood something profound. The letter, the mistake, the king's arrival, it had all led to this moment, a moment of reckoning, of trust, of the first step towards something neither of them could yet name, but both felt in every pulse of their hearts. And as the wind howled through the mist outside, carrying with it the promise of challenges yet unseen, the Alpha King leaned closer, his voice low, soft, and almost reverent. Lyra, the night is far from over, and neither are we. The night pressed close against the tower, thick with mist and the quiet hum of the forest. Inside, Lyra moved with a cautious certainty, guided by a rhythm she had begun to recognize, the rhythm of the Alpha King. Their bond, formed over whispered truths and midnight conversations, had grown stronger, tempered in shadows and curiosity. Tonight, however, the stakes were higher than ever. The king stood near the window, cloak trailing in the candlelight, his stormy eyes fixed on the forest beyond. He did not speak at first. He simply watched, as if reading some hidden message in the wind. Lyra approached him quietly, her own pulse echoing in her chest. She no longer felt the same trembling fear she had once carried. Fear remained, but now it was tempered with purpose, a willingness to face what came. Together, they will strike tonight, he said at last, his voice low and deliberate. The traitors in the court are bold, clever, and desperate, and they believe I am unprepared. Lyra nodded, her hands tightening slightly. Then we must be ready, she said, the resolve in her voice surprising even herself. She had discovered strength she had never known, courage that had been buried beneath years of solitude and caution. And now, standing beside the Alpha King, she understood that their fates were entwined. The king turned toward her, his gaze softening in a way he rarely allowed. You have changed since the letter, he said quietly. You have grown. Courage has a way of transforming even the quietest heart. Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of pride and something far more complex, something she could not yet name. I have learned from you, she admitted softly, from your presence, your strength, and the way you see the truth. A flicker of a smile passed over the king's lips, rare and fleeting, like sunlight through storm clouds. For a moment, silence settled over the tower, heavy, but not oppressive. Outside, the forest stirred with whispers of wind, as if nature itself waited for what was to come. And then the sound came, a faint rustle, deliberate, measured. Someone was approaching the tower. The king's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his dagger, his movements precise, calm, and commanding. They believe the shadows hide them, he murmured, almost to himself. They underestimate the night, and the bond that has been forged here. Lyra stepped closer, her own heartbeat steady. And what bond is that? She asked softly, though she knew the answer. He turned to her fully, his stormy eyes locking with hers. The bond of trust, he said quietly. Of courage shared. Of hearts willing to stand together when darkness arrives. That bond cannot be broken lightly. The first figure appeared at the edge of the mist, moving silently but deliberately. Lyra's breath caught, but she did not flinch. She had learned to face fear, to channel it into action rather than allowing it to control her. The king's presence anchored her, steadying her. They think they can catch me unprepared, he said softly. But tonight, we rewrite expectation. The traitors moved closer, unaware that the Alpha King and Lyra were already waiting. Their minds and hearts aligned. With a silent nod, he gestured to her, and she understood immediately. Together, they would face the danger. Together, they would protect what mattered. The night erupted suddenly. Shadows shifted, figures lunged, and the air filled with the sound of soft clashes and quiet commands. Lyra moved instinctively, guided by the rhythm of the king's movements. They were a single force, perfectly attuned, her courage and intuition complementing his strength and strategy. In the heart of the chaos, Lyra saw the determination in the king's eyes, the rare vulnerability that he had allowed her to witness in stolen moments. And she understood something profound. He trusted her not because he had to, but because he chose to. One by one, the intruders were confronted, their schemes unraveling under the precision and synergy of Lyra and the king. The forest beyond the tower echoed with whispers and retreating footsteps, and the danger gradually faded, leaving a stillness that was almost sacred. Breathing heavily, Lyra sank onto a chair, her hands trembling from the adrenaline. The king approached, his cloak damp, and his eyes still intense, yet softened by relief. "You have proven yourself," he said quietly. "Not just in courage but in heart." Lyra looked up at him, a mixture of awe and something deeper stirring in her chest. "We did it together," she said softly. I could not have done it alone." He knelt slightly to meet her gaze, his presence overwhelming yet gentle. "And you never had to," he said, his voice low, resonant, carrying an unspoken weight. "Courage shared is power multiplied. Fear shared is diminished. And trust is forged in the face of darkness." The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the tower. For the first time, Lyra saw not just the Alpha King, but the man beneath the legend, the man who bore burdens she could barely imagine, who had learned to trust, who had allowed her into his solitude. A silence settled over them, profound and unbroken, as if the world itself paused to witness this fragile, growing connection. Lyra felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with the full weight of understanding. She had dared to speak in the dark. She had dared to trust. And in return, the king had allowed her to see his truth. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand toward her. "Lyra, will you stand with me? Not as subject and ruler, but as equals? Not because you must, but because you choose to?" Lyra's fingers trembled as she placed her hand in his. The warmth of his touch spread through her, steadying and reassuring. "I choose," she whispered. A faint smile curved his lips, and for the first time, it was full and unguarded. "Then the night is ours," he said softly. "And the dawn will find us changed." Together, they stood at the window, hands clasped, watching the misted forest slowly yield to the first light of morning. The danger of the night had passed, but the bond forged in shadows remained stronger, deeper, and infinitely more precious than either could have imagined. Lyra realized, with a quiet certainty, that her life would never be the same. She had begun the night as a lonely figure in a tower, afraid of the world and herself. Now, she stood with the Alpha King, not beneath him, not behind him, but beside him, equal in courage, trust, and the unspoken truths that bound them. And the king, too, had changed. He had learned that power was not measured solely by strength or fear, but by the willingness to trust, to share burdens, and to allow connection where before there had only been solitude. The sun rose slowly, golden light spilling over the misted trees, illuminating the tower and the quiet kingdom beyond. For Lyra, the light felt different now, less harsh, less lonely, more filled with possibility. The world was no longer something to fear, but something to embrace. With the man who had come to her door in the dead of night and changed everything. The Alpha King looked at her, his stormy eyes softening in the morning glow. "You dared to speak," he said quietly. "And now, you have dared to stand. That is bravery beyond measure." Lyra smiled, a mixture of relief, pride, and something tender stirring in her chest. "And now, we face the world together." Numberresent.com. He nodded, his gaze unwavering, filled with quiet intensity. "Together," he said. For a long moment, they simply stood, hand in hand, hearts beating in rhythm, the silence of the tower, embracing them like a protective cloak. Outside, the mist began to lift, revealing a kingdom waiting. Uncertain, yet alive with possibility. But within the tower, there was certainty, connection, and a bond forged not just in the night, but in courage, trust, and the quiet, unspoken power of the heart. And somewhere, in the shifting light of dawn, Lyra understood something profound. The letter, the mistake, the fear, the king's arrival. They had all been part of a journey not just toward survival, but toward discovery, redemption, and love. A love forged not in ease, not in comfort, but in shadows, storms, and courage. The storm had passed. The night had yielded. And in its place, something new had risen. A connection that would endure. Not because it was easy, but because it was chosen. The Alpha King had come for her in the dark, and she had met him with her heart wide open. Together, they had found a dawn worth facing.